Right, so last night we took this thing out drifting. While I was getting the hang of it and getting back into the groove, something happened to the external wastegate. It's real loose and wobbly now, and it doesn't work. So, and we start the car. All the exhaust is just coming straight out the wastegate. The diaphragm isn't working. And so last night we were just drifting on NA power, and it did just fine. So, but driving it home afterwards was a really big disappointment. I hadn't driven this car before I got the turbo on it for probably a month, and so I'm used to this with the turbo, and I've been driving it every day with the turbo. And going from the turbo to non-turbo is an extremely noticeable difference. So, yeah. It's definitely a big power increase. It just doesn't pull at all without the turbo. Anyway, we're going to come in here and pull this wastegate off. And luckily this was still under warranty. So I'm sending this one back. I already have another one on the way. There should be very little downtime with it being non-turbo. Come on. There we go, there's my wastegate. We're gonna go ahead and pop the cap on this and see what's going on, cause yeah, it's not boosting, and that's the culprit. So okay, so there's the diaphragm. Hanging out with pretty simple little spring in there. So there's no evidence of anything wrong up here. So there's your external wastegate. It's just got a spring and a rubber diaphragm to just keep everything separate. So this rubber diaphragm sits right in that little groove, and this has spaces that you can put in other sized springs to increase the boost pressure on it. And so you have an inlet on the top and an inlet below the diaphragm, and basically you're putting boost into this lower one, which puts pressure from the bottom side up on that spring, and then it raises, it opens up the valve inside of there as boost gets put on here, and the boost meets the requirements of the spring. It'll open up. Now if this is only 4 psi1, and if you want to go higher, we have this opening on the top side. You'd route your boost regulator in line between these two, and so basically you would fake the boost. You'd fake this out into thinking that you have 4 psi on the bottom and nothing on top. Even if you have like 8 psi on top, you'd have to have 12 on the bottom to be able to open it up. So that's kind of how a boost regulator works with an external wastegate and the diaphragm and everything. So everything in here looks pretty good. I think it's going to be down on the bottom side. In the valve body that messed up. Down in here you can see very obviously that there's a big boost leak. So the valve guide or whatever it is not shutting. I can open it. No, I can't. Yeah, it's the actual valve in there that screwed up. So that's why it's not happy. I'm actually going to go ahead and take this apart and see what I can do about it. Okay, with it like this, I'm going to come in here and pull off this guide really quick. Alright, so all this is going to be doing is twisting that. Oh, and it's not because it's seized right now. So usually you'd have to get a big screwdriver on the bottom of that because it would just spin. But right now it's seized and so it doesn't do anything. I think I'm going to put a screwdriver in here and see if I can pop it up. Just kind of go. It wants to come off. So there everything is. It looks like it's just seized in there. Let's take it apart a little farther and see what we get. Why is every single one of these Allen heads a different size? It's ridiculous. The only points that the ad really talked about were that this brass bushing oops, this brass bushing here was really high quality and that the actual valve was really high quality steel. I'm gonna say that's not the case. It might be the case actually, but they're just not machined nicely. Because obviously they don't fit if it's seized. There was some kind of tolerance that was not on. So what I want to do is just take a hammer and beat the crap out of this. That's not a good idea though. But what I think I will do is go ahead and screw this back on and then beat it. Because there's no other way that this is going to do anything. Because it's not moving. Alright, I am going to be nice and go ahead and give it some WD-40. Couldn't find my penetrating oil, but this will kind of work. I'm just tapping this really lightly. Trying to see if I can get it to do anything. It is coming out. So now, when I try and turn it, oh hey, it just broke free. Nice. No, it did not. The whole bushing broke free. See that? That's not what I wanted to have happen. There we go. There we go. So there's the valve. It has like corrosion on it. That could be why it's stuck. I'm gonna go ahead and take some Scotch-Brite, sand this down, get it smooth, get it clean, and see if it'll slide in and out of that brass bushing smoothly like it's supposed to. Okay, so what I've actually done is come in here with just some 150 sandpaper and roughed it up this way. So when I started doing it with the Scotch-Brite, you can feel, if you like run your fingernail along it lengthwise, you can feel the little cuts from the lathe. Now this is a Chinese part. The reason Chinese parts are so cheap is because the manufacturing quality isn't there. I guess. No, it's there, it's just not up to par to the really expensive brands, and that's how they save money and are able to sell them for a cheaper price, is because they don't take as long. So they machined this valve, and when they came along here to make it the right diameter, the lathe went faster than it would on an American-made part or a other part that's high performance and is just better quality. And so there were little ridges, really, really small. You couldn't feel them unless you ran your fingernail around it, or you took sandpaper, and you could hear it. You could kind of hear it making a goofy noise, and I've already gone past that, so it's perfectly smooth now. I'm going to take 1000 grit and just polish it. Then it should slide in and out of this brass bushing very easily. That's the goal anyway. It's still feeling like it's not wanting to, and so I might still have to do some things. I got it stuck again. So yeah, it might be actually the brass bushing. I don't know. It's just all having issues because the tolerances between this shaft and this bushing aren't where they need to be for it to function correctly and properly on a long-term basis. So I already have this one's getting returned. I already have another one that's in the mail. If that wasn't the case and I was just kind of stuck without being able to return it, I would take this to my machine shop and just make this bushing fit this shaft perfectly, and I would be all set, because there's nothing wrong with the diaphragm, there's nothing wrong with the top end of it, or even this cast fitting. It's just the two moving parts that are having issues, and even a relatively beginning machinist would be able to have a pretty easy time of making these two fit, and I'm a little more experienced than a new machinist. And so yeah, I'm just gonna return this one and get a new one. When I get the new one, I'll probably take it apart and do this to it so that I don't have to worry about it seizing down the line. Yeah, this is mega messed up. It's not supposed to. It's supposed to just fit right down there easily. It's supposed to be snug, but it's not supposed to bind like that. So I don't know what's going on. I think it's on the bushings end. So we'll see. Okay, so what I've done here, I've taken an Allen wrench that's about the same size as the hole, and I've wrapped a piece of sandpaper around it, and now I'm just kind of sanding down a little bit. And make sure you turn this, because the Allen wrench obviously is not perfectly round and it just has those points. And so those points are going to be what's actually doing the sanding. And this is brass, and brass is pretty soft, so you don't have to go crazy on it. But you do want to make sure it'll fit. So just by doing that much, still not getting like any kind of... This valve just doesn't want to go in. See, like, squeezing that together. Oh, there we go. Maybe. Jeez. It's making me wonder if this shaft is bent. So it'll go on about that far and then it stops. I've been working on the bushing and I'm getting it to go down. It's still kind of tight, tighter than I would want it. But I don't want it, I'm at a really fine line right here where I don't want it to be able to rock back side to side, but I want it to be able to go up and down smoothly. So I gotta make sure, and just by doing this it should help lubricate it. That's why they use brass and steel, is because the brass is softer, and as it kind of flakes off, those flakes will kind of act as a lubricant for the shaft. Kind of like how you can use, if you ever made like a Pinewood Derby car, and they stick magnesium on the wheels, little tiny flakes to help lubricate the movement. And that's the issue that I'm having here. So I'm just using the shaft as a way to almost lap this bushing so that they fit perfect. Just kind of finding the spots where it kind of sticks and just keeping going on that little spot so that this can just run smooth and I won't have any issues. It still sticks a little when it's down here, but I think there's going to be enough pressure for the spring to pop that back up. So, pretty happy with that. I think I'm going to call that about good and put this back together and put it back on the car. There's one spot right there that's tight. And I can't tell if that's on the shaft. I think it's on the shaft because I didn't sand the shaft as much down here. You can almost see that difference between up here and down here. So I'm going to sand the shaft a little farther. Because I don't remember how high this actually goes. And if it goes all the way to the end, it's stuck. And so I'm going to sand the shaft. And it's kind of a hard spot to get to. But you do your best and you make it work. So last night I was pretty bummed that this part failed, and luckily I was like a day within my warranty period, within 30 days of buying it. Excuse me. I was still in warranty, so I wasn't that bummed. But if I wouldn't have been in warranty, it would really suck to spend another $50 on a wastegate that might have the same problem. So last night I was debating on whether or not I should try and find a used tile or 6-speed or I don't know. Anyway, buy a name brand aftermarket external wastegate. And I really didn't want to spend more than $100 on a wastegate, even though I know it would be worth it. You wouldn't have to do any of this for it. But now, taking this apart, I would argue that it is worth buying the $50 Chinese wastegate and then taking it apart, either taking this to a machine shop or just doing it like I'm doing with just sandpaper and sanding this down so that the shaft is perfectly smooth and that it is perfectly fit to this bushing. Because this has taken me about 10, maybe 15 minutes to get these perfect. Maybe another 5 minutes of taking taking the wastegate apart. That's like 25 minutes, maybe a half an hour in full disassembly, machine work, and reassembly to have a perfectly functional wastegate. Now for $53.99 and a half hour of your time, I would argue, unless you're making like $1,000 an hour, this is cheaper and more worth the money than buying a $250 or $400 external wastegate of a name brand. I'm not saying anything against those brands. They're great. I would assume having one would be worth it. But when you're doing it on the budget, you got to find ways to make less expensive parts work. And this is how. You just take it apart. The price that you pay for a part doesn't really reflect the price of the material, but the price of tooling and machine work. And so when you buy American-made parts, usually they're much higher quality machine work. That's why they cost a lot more, is because Americans are getting paid to machine these parts, or we just have more protocols in place in US factories so that you come out with a part that fits perfectly. You have higher tolerances. A Chinese part, that's how they're just pumping them out to make money, and if they can save 30 seconds, or it might not even be that long, 10 or 20 or 30 seconds machining a part, if they can save that much time, they can pump out more parts. And so that's what the Chinese manufacturers for cheap parts are doing. A lot of high quality parts are made in China, but they cost more. It's just like buying a high quality part here in the United States. And so when you hear people talk about Chinese parts, they're usually talking about the cheap Chinese parts. And that's just one of the things. And you have to deal with that. If you're buying less expensive parts, you have to be able to reconcile the price of the part and versus the quality and deal with that. And this is one of the ways that I found to deal with cheap Chinese parts, is to just take it apart myself and make sure everything fits before I use it. Now with this one I didn't do that, obviously. I just put it on and it worked for a few weeks. And then when I really started getting in on it, when I was drifting and doing donuts, that's when the part failed, is because it was under a lot of pressure, a lot of stress. It got hot, and so it expanded, and then by expanding it didn't fit in the bushing. So it's not made for high performance applications or anything like that, and so I can't expect it to hold up to that. That's why they have all those disclaimers on their ads, is because the tolerances that they use to make the parts aren't high enough to deal with the stressors that are involved in some of those applications. And that is one of the main reasons you have to pay so much for race parts, is because those parts are specifically made with specific tolerances to deal with the stresses of racing or motorsport, where there's a lot of stress, a lot of heat, and the parts are just going to be taking a beating, and they have to be able to perform to a certain level. So don't just accept everybody as saying, oh, Chinese parts suck. They're relatively good, and like, I don't know, this cast steel piece isn't the greatest, but it does what it's supposed to do, and that's what I'm looking for. And then the parts like this, you can take it apart. The two moving parts you can take apart and fix. So hopefully this will work out in the long run. I'll be able to slap it on and be good to go. Don't have to worry about it anymore. I'm going to go back over it with 1000 grit just to smooth everything out. So now, moment of truth. Still got some squeaky in it, but a whole lot less than what used to be there. Run this through it a couple more times. The cool thing about this is you can kind of feel the high spots when you're doing this, and you focus on those areas, and you can smooth them down to where they fit, and you'll get a perfect bushing. There's no side-to-side wiggle, but it works perfect. That's what you want to see. So there's your top tip. Pull apart your Chinese parts and fix them. I would totally recommend buying this external wastegate now. So I'm going to reassemble it, get it back on the car, and I shouldn't have any other issues down the road. There we go, we're back in business. So